purpose of this 7 minutes talk is to share a little bit of information about the 5 steps retrospective framework. And this framework was popularized by the book by Derby and Larsen, Agile Retrospectives. And the focus of a retrospective should be reflection. The goal should be some kind of reflection. And retrospective facilitation is a complex topic for the 7 minutes. So I hope this will spark your interest and you'll join the conversation on thisisretrospectivefacilitation.com. Now, the 5 steps framework is one approach to setting structure to your retrospectives. There are others. There's adaptive action, there is ORED, and all they do is, again, giving a little bit of structure to your retrospective. When you are not, when you're not doing that, when you're just focusing on the activities, for example, the 3 columns, or radar, or sailboat, and there are plenty of activities out there. You can find a lot of them on Retromat. You can find quite a few on liberating structures. What I've seen is kind of like a tendency to premature convergence, and what I call a whack-a-mole retrospective, where we try and fix all the little things coming up and only spend a few minutes on them. And also sometimes disengagement, negative emotional attractor, kind of feelings. So let's go through the 5 steps. And the 5 steps are setting the stage, gather data, generate insights, decide what to do, and close out. And it's a little bit of a journey. It's all connected, but we'll focus first on the 2 steps: opening and closing, setting the stage and closing out. They're critical, and they're critical because when you set the stage is when you kind of determine the psychological safety for this session. If there is no psychological safety, people feel that they're going to be blamed about what they talk about. They probably won't share anything, and it'll be kind of like a blame situation. A blame situation, blame game. And so you don't want that. You want to avoid that. There are activities to do that. Again, we're not focusing so much on the activities. Some are from directive, ESVP might be one. And again, eliciting the positive emotional attractor from Professor Boyatzis' work might be a good way to foster psychological safety. Also, now's the time to share the purpose, a purpose that you discussed beforehand with the team about the retrospective. Are we looking back at the last week? Are we looking back at the last month? Are we looking at a specific event? Retrospective doesn't have to be focused on the last iteration. And also team norms. So you can, now's the time to review team norms or to set them up if the team don't have them, if it's a new team. Now, closing is also critical. It is critical because this is when you get feedback about the retrospective itself. You'll do other things, but let's first analyze the feedback. So it doesn't have to spend a lot of time. I spend usually 5 minutes for a 1-hour retrospective. And a very quick activity I do here is return of time invested. Between 0 and 4, how well spent was the time today? 1 idea to make it go up 1 point, 1 thing you liked about today. It's anonymous, it's quick, and as long as you're good and stop the time 5 minutes before the end, this will happen all the time. It'll be second nature. You'll always get feedback, and you'll know when things are going the wrong way. And the team will decide or give input in what they like and what they don't like about the retrospective. Things to do also here is a round of appreciations. That's really a great way to hang on a high note, especially after tough conversations. Another thing when you close is to determine what are the next steps. So leave, of course, appreciation at the very end, but when you close, make sure that we know what's happening next. Now, off to the 3 other steps. So say that we set the stage and it's a safe environment. And when we gather data, step number 2, we are looking at getting a shared perspective about what happened, a shared view. So we're not trying to solution things. So not solutioning, but just getting a shared perspective. This is a time to remember, look at artifacts. As a facilitator, this is a time not to tell the group what you see, but ask them and make them work as a group. Now, activities here can be the 3 columns, sailboat. You're gathering data. At the end of this step, you should have a shared understanding of what happened, a mutual understanding at least of what happened, hearing everyone's perspective. Might not have agreement, but you can kind of reach that mutual understanding, hearing everyone's voices about the events. So if people try and jump to solutions there, just like remind them, hey, look, this is not a time to solution. This is just a time to make sure everyone understands what happened. Once you're there, once you have like an understanding about what happened, then you try and generate insights. This is the critical step. This is another critical core step, and this is where the gold is. This is a time to prioritize and to look for patterns. So if you have many items generated from your data, try and find patterns, try and find connections, and then prioritize. Put in like a poll. I don't like to call it voting, because it seems like someone loses and someone wins. A poll on where is the group more interested in focusing today. Now here's where you'll have a little bit of a challenge. If people are used to play the whack-a-mole retrospectives, where they spend 2 minutes trying fixing everything, or 5 minutes trying fixing everything, and not really having a deeper reflection, they might complain. And usually my answer to that is, if it's important to the group, it will come back in the next iteration. Or you can always discuss that topic, if it's pressing to you, tomorrow morning after stand-up. And oftentimes what we do is we run daily retrospectives, shorter 5-10 minutes retrospectives, where that low-hanging fruit can be picked up. So the group has a forum to discuss those low-hanging fruit, as well as having a more powerful retrospective focused on one topic. Now, this is a time to foster divergent thinking. Naively, you could say brainstorming is a bit more than that. Senkena's book is really good and gets into the detail of how to foster that. And eventually start convergent thinking. Now, one thing in this step to keep in mind is system 1, system 2. The latest neuroscience research tells us how our brain works, how much more powerful is our subconscious. So taking breaks rather than spending an hour brainstorming, if you do a longer retrospective, is really important. So keep that in mind. Another thing at this point to keep in mind is the Canavan framework helps us to understand what kind of system are we looking at. Is this an obvious problem, a complicated problem, a complex problem, a chaotic problem? Depending on which kind of domain the system or subsystem lives in, we might want to pick different activities and generate different kind of insights. 5 whys is an activity that might be good for an obvious problem, where cause and effect is kind of like obvious, but not for a complex problem. So stay away from that in that domain. And lastly, we move on to decide what to do. So at this point, after generating insight, we have a series of ideas, but we want to make them more concrete. What is the next step? That's when we decide what to do. What is the next step or next steps that we can action? And it's okay if it's a follow-up meeting. We might not have time to create a proper plan in the minutes that we have left. If we do, that's perfect. We can use activities like SMART, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time-bound action item. That's great. But if not, it's okay if there's a follow-up meeting. But make sure that that follow-up meeting is specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time-bound. So you set a date, you invite the right people, and the right people will know why they're invited to this. What's the purpose of this follow-up meeting? This was a really fast kind of like journey through the 5 steps. I hope it kind of like spark some interest in you. You can join the conversation on thisisretrospectivefacilitation.com. We are on Twitter, and I'm looking forward to hear your questions, and I'm sure you have many.